Welcome to Mystery Date, where we dive into the weird, the wild, and the downright puzzling. While our podcast is primarily for entertainment with plenty of laughs along the way, we occasionally discuss serious and sensitive topics. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners, so discretion is advised.
Imagine a frosty night deep in the Ural Mountains, where the wind whispers secrets only the snow knows. It's 1959 in Soviet Russia, and 9 intrepid hikers set out, their spirits as high as the peaks they aim to conquer. Yet, they vanish into winter's embrace, leaving behind a tapestry of mystery, woven from eerie clues and unanswered questions. What really happened on that fateful expedition? As we step into the chilling enigma of the Dyatlov Pass, we invite you to journey with us through the fog of speculation and the shadows of history, piecing together theories that are as varied and haunting as the landscape itself. Will we find the truth, or will it remain as elusive as the echoes of those last footsteps? Let's discover the answers together.
I'm Christian.
I'm Kate. Welcome to Mystery Date.
It's date night, meaning we get to talk about all things mysterious and weird.
This season is called Into the Woods, and it involves mysteries surrounding woods, forests, and jungles all around our world.
Tonight's mystery is the Dyatlov Pass Incident theories. So this is going to be part 2 to our Dyatlov Pass coverage. In part 1, we discussed the story, and now we'll pretty much discuss the theories and the investigation that happened around this event.
Get comfy, grab your favorite drink, and let's start the show. Ooh, that one's good.
That's really good. Peach Bellini.
Yeah, peach Bellini.
All right. So since this is part 2, I'm just going to do a little recap on what part 1 was, just so we can all feel kind of on the same playing field right now.
Get it fresh in our minds again, just in case everyone didn't listen to it immediately before this episode.
Exactly. We will try to release this just 1 week after our part 1, so you'll get it a little sooner than our normal 2-week episode release schedule. So hopefully it's a little fresh in your mind. But in case it's not, let's get into it. In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a trek through the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. Led by Igor Dyatlov, their goal was to reach Ural Mountain, a route categorized as pretty difficult. And when the group failed to return, a search party was launched. What they found sparked decades of speculation and mystery. The hikers' tent was discovered on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, and it was ripped open from the inside. Their belongings were still inside, but the hikers themselves had fled into the freezing night. Many of them were barefoot or only wearing socks. Their bodies were eventually found scattered in the snow, some were under several feet of it. And while some had died from apparent hypothermia, others had more disturbing injuries. The more disturbing nature of these deaths led to a flood of theories over the years, and some believe that the group was caught in a rare kind of avalanche, or maybe something else that forced them to flee and caused some of these injuries. Tonight, on our second part, we're going to dive into, well, a lot of the investigation that followed suit after the discovery of the bodies and the theories that kind of poured in from everybody after this case became famous. So let's get into it. Now, back to the investigation. Now that the hikers, all of their bodies had been found and brought home for their autopsies, this was when the bulk of this investigation was really allowed to happen. So we already talked about a few key things during the first part that were found during this initial search, such as the tent and the condition of the bodies. And to recap, like we said before, the tent was found with multiple cuts that were made from the inside. Nearby where the hikers and supplies and all their clothing kind of lay, it was all just left in that same area. All of their important supplies were near that tent. A few hundred feet away from the tent, the bodies of 5 of the hikers would be discovered relatively quickly, and they were all found in various states, but they received injuries that would be soon compared to a car crash. Some were found without proper clothing, and others were found with, well, different people's clothing. Months later, the rest of the bodies would be found buried deep beneath the snow in a ravine, essentially. After that, the investigation really started to kick off. So that's where it all kind of went from there.
Yeah, it's where we left off last time.
Yep. So that's pretty much just a quick recap again, so you can get on a level playing field of part 2 here. After the bodies were discovered, things kind of get a little bit interesting, I'd say so, from the government's point of view. I think you'll see exactly what I mean. When the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogrova, Yuri Doroshenko, and Yuri Krivonishenko were examined, their deaths were initially ruled as hypothermia, as the medical examiner found no injuries that would directly lead to their deaths. So, I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, maybe some superficial cuts and bruises, but it's like that wouldn't have killed them, especially not without leading to other signs of death, like an infection or something from a cut. But yeah, it's like, okay, that's, they might have had a few wounds, but not deathly wounds.
Exactly. No grave wounds, no clear, okay, well, they're bleeding from whatever, so that obviously could have been what killed them. It was just unclear. So, I mean, you find them out frozen in the wilderness, you can assume most likely, hypothermia.
Yeah, especially since so many of them were not properly clothed. I mean, they're out in these conditions in their pajamas or almost naked, not wearing shoes. They were not wearing their full hiking gear out there. So it's very, very reasonable for them to come to that conclusion.
Oh, 100%. I don't think that's like super wacky.
Yeah, especially it's 1959. It's not today. So, and again, this was in Soviet Russia at the time. So who knows what their police tactics and methods and resources were then and there versus here and now.
I mean, we already know, again, based on what we heard in part 1, that they took a while to really get a jump on this case. For whatever reason, we don't know, but who knows what could have been lost in that time. I mean, the wild is crazy and unforgiving too, especially dead things. So you don't know what they're going to do to it.
Right. And it was hard to even get them to pursue it as a missing persons case at first, Like, I remember in part 1, we discussed the families of some of these hikers were like, hey, they're supposed to be back. Have you heard from them? Like this organization that they're taking this trek through, like what's going on? And they were just lying, basically like, oh, it's fine. They, they're delayed, but we heard from them and everybody's safe and it's all good. Like nothing to worry about. And there was something to worry about. Not that maybe they didn't know that and they were just kind of lying to save face and then thought to themselves, we're definitely going to investigate this now. But either way, like, why didn't you take it seriously from the beginning? It took a minute to get them to even go out to find them.
Yeah. I mean, it was all because of the families of these people that were lost that the government finally decided to do something. A lot of them rallied together and made a loud enough voice to say, no, you need to go out there and look. And they finally did. And like I said, who knows what could have been lost in that time. I do want to point out, because in part 1, we mentioned that Slobodin was found with a crack in his skull. But again, that was not thought to be fatal. It was more or less just kind of like a hairline fracture almost.
Concussion worthy, but not death worthy.
That's why he was, again, roped in with the hypothermia. And the others did have some pretty superficial wounds kind of scattered throughout them. But again, that's to be expected being left out in the wilderness for weeks, essentially.
Again, minor cuts, bruises, scrapes, little bites from animals or things. It's like, okay, that they also are usually able to determine when things happened, if it happened pre or post mortem.
Yeah.
So, and again, I don't know how great these things were back in the 50s, 60s, but I assume we still had some level of determination there. So they probably, they knew that those wounds weren't the things that caused their death.
I mean, definitely in this time, they were able to look at it and be like, okay, well, there's nothing on the, like we said, on the outside that seems like the direct cause of death.
Right. So, either the wounds that they did have were minor enough to not be considered deadly, or they were clearly wounds that had happened post-mortem, like an animal munching on the corpse, unfortunately.
Yeah. Easy killer.
Yeah. Whoops.
Once the other 4 bodies were discovered and examined again May, because they were found 2 months after, a slightly different picture was presented to the investigators. Brignoli was found to have major skull damage, which likely contributed to his death. And Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures, which again likely contributed to their deaths. So now investigators were left pretty puzzled, as 3 of the new bodies likely died due to blunt force trauma, not hypothermia. This brought in forensic expert Boris Vrozdeheny, and he was quoted saying, "The force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high." He would go on to compare it to that of a car crash. That same forensic expert would also deduce that the missing facial features from a lot of the hikers, like Dubinina's missing tongue and Zolotaryov's missing eyebrows, were most likely post-mortem injuries, suffered due to the location of where the bodies were found. So I know, it's a lot, and there's even more that came out during the investigation that it's simply too much to cover it all. I'm going to give just a quick rundown of the important things that were discovered during this. So, 3 out of the 9 hikers suffered fatal injuries. Those fatal injuries were again comparable to a car crash. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. All members of the group seemingly left the tent of their own free will. The exact time of death is not known for any of the hikers, and all of the suffered superficial wounds to their faces, hands, and other areas of their bodies were most likely from outside sources. Later on, trace levels of radiation would be discovered on multiple articles of clothing belonging to the hikers. Some of the hikers also lacked proper clothing for the climate, despite having, well, proper clothing packed and ready. So with all this information, on May 28th, 1959, 23 days after the discovery of the last 4 hikers, the case was closed.
That seems abrupt.
Yeah, what do you think they ruled it as?
With no real answers and lots of questions. I'm assuming they ruled it as, they said they all died of either hypothermia or trauma, so they probably deemed that there was an avalanche, or that there was a bad storm, and that when everybody tried to flee, they either fell down that ravine and got the blunt force trauma, or froze to death and couldn't escape the storm. That's what I'm gonna guess they went with, and they tried to close that up and wrap it pretty quickly without going into more of the questions that had arisen around the circumstances.
Here is a quote from the case files that detail the ruling made by the Soviet government at the time. Considering the absence of external injuries to the bodies or no signs of a fight, the presence of all the valuables of the group, and also taking into account the conclusion of the medical examinations for the causes of the deaths of the hikers, it is concluded that the cause of their demise was an overwhelming force, which the hikers were not able to overcome.
That even mean?
Yeah, you tell me. What does that mean?
That's an official cause of death?
Well,
there seemed to be an overwhelming force, and they all died.
In 1959.
Case closed, boys.
Apparently they thought that that was good enough to suffice.
Okay, this is getting fishier now, because it definitely seems like there's something they know that they don't want to be uncovered with more investigating.
I mean,
why would... I know there's a lot going on at the time. Like, there was more wars and, Soviet Russia. There was a lot going on. Maybe the government and police priority wasn't on these hikers and this investigation. But to try to wrap it up this quickly when people still have unanswered questions, and then to not even really have like an official cause of death listed, they're just keeping it so vague. Like, that's so fishy to me. It just seems like, why not say, well, we're going to keep investigating, but we don't have the manpower to really put towards it, so we'll do our best. And then just like, don't do much work on it, let the case grow cold after a while, and after several years, then you can be like, we tried, and then close it. And not that that's the right thing to do, that's still a gray area and maybe more on the shitty side, but at least that way, like, they could cover their own ass. It makes it seem more suspicious on the cop side of things to close up the investigation by cause of death, unusual, unstoppable force.
An overwhelming force.
Overwhelming force.
And I was going to say, could you imagine? I can't. I don't even want to put myself in this spot. But on a serious note, the family members of these hikers getting that back as the report. Oh, how'd they pass? Oh, an overwhelming force on the mountain. I'm sorry, what? That's not an answer.
Excuse me? Could you explain?
What caused the overwhelming force? What was the force?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Following the closure of the case, several leaders within the local police force and those within the sports club at the university were removed from their positions due to their alleged failures in this case. And that was it. It was closed and, according to the Soviet government, solved, locked away. It was on March 9th, 1959, that Yuri Doroshenko, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Yuri Krivonishenko would be laid to rest. Igor Dyatlov and Rustem Slobodin would be buried the following day on March 10th, 1959. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolatov, and Semyon Zolotov were buried on May 11th, 1959. Finally, Nikolai Brigolis would be laid to rest the following day on May 12th, 1959. In the year 1999, with the help of the Ural State Technical University, the Dyatlov Foundation was founded. This foundation would continue to investigate and gather information related to this case. They also maintain the Dyatlov Museum that was set up to preserve the memories of those lost. So to wrap up the investigation and the general story of Dyatlov Pass, I will say, in 2019, the Russian government reopened the Dyatlov Pass case, and after a few months of investigation, it was again officially concluded that this was a slab avalanche. Which, quick definition, a slab avalanche occurs when a thick, cohesive layer of snow, known as a slab, breaks away from an underlying snowpack and slides downhill, often triggered by a combination of factors including weak layers, steep slopes, and external loads. So basically, the new investigation concluded that the slab avalanche hit the tent, causing injuries and immediate panic, which also led to an exposure and untimely death. And here's a quote from them from this most recent investigation. The most appealing aspect of Kuryakov's scenario is that the Dyatlov's party's actions no longer seem irrational. The snow slab, according to Green, probably would have been loud and cracked and rumbled as it fell across the tent, making an avalanche seem imminent. Kuryakov noted that although the skiers made an error in the placement of their tent, everything they did subsequently was textbook. They conducted an emergency evacuation to ground that would be safe from the avalanche, and they took shelter in the woods. They started a fire and they dug a snow cave. Had they been less experienced, they might have remained near the tent and dug it out and survived. But avalanches are by far the biggest risk in the mountains in winter, and the more experience you have, the more you fear them. So the skiers' expertise essentially doomed them. And this was from the New Yorker, and it was written by Douglas Preston.
Interesting.
Yuri Yudin, the only survivor of the Dyatlov Pass incident, carried the heavy weight of being the sole person to walk away from this tragedy. He was struck with an overwhelming sense of guilt, constantly wondering if he could have ever done more to save his friends. The illness that forced him to turn back early pretty much felt like a curse, and he often was quoted saying, "I was very upset by the fact that I survived. I thought that something could have been done, that I could have helped, but in the end, nothing could have saved them." Haunted by the mystery of their deaths, Yuri found it difficult to accept the truth that never came to light. In interviews, he often spoke of the strange, unexplainable nature of the incident, noting that they were just ordinary students. What happened to them was not ordinary. He also remembered his friends as vibrant, intelligent individuals and not just victims, and that loss weighed heavily on him throughout his life. The silence surrounding the official investigation only added to the haunting nature of this event. Yuri himself summed it up by saying, "We have no answers, and the silence about what happened is the loudest thing of all." The guilt, the grief, and unanswered questions that followed him all the way until his death in 2013. A constant reminder of the lives lost and the mystery that remains unsolved. So there you have it, the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. But of course, the mystery doesn't stop there. While officially this case is closed and deemed the aftermath of a sudden avalanche, that doesn't stop the countless other questions and answers that this leaves us with. We are now going to look into several different theories that I picked out when it comes to the Dyatlov Pass incident. The first one is the official one, an avalanche.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one. I guessed that this was their initial ruling. I'm surprised it wasn't. I'm surprised they decided to go with overwhelming force and not avalanche. But that would have been my first guess officially, just because not everyone necessarily had these injuries. The ones who did, it was more blunt force trauma, broken bones, and collapsations. Collapsations? It's a word now. I don't know if it is, but...
No, I'll take it. I like it. Collapsations.
Collapsations of bones and structures.
What did
inside.
we say that one episode? Speculators. We got speculators and collapsations.
Kate's Dictionary, everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you have these major trauma wounds on the inside of the body, but not a lot of matching wounds on the outside. The wounds on the outside are like their eyeball is missing, their tongue is missing. Well, like the one forensic guy said, that was very, very most likely a post-mortem injury that probably occurred like from some animals in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Of course, those are the parts they went for first. Like, it's morbid to talk about, but it does make sense.
Oh, it fills in the blanks. Yeah.
Yeah, especially it's like, oh, if they heard it rumbling, they knew that that was a sign of an avalanche. They said, quick, get out of the tent, get out of the tent. They slash it open, they start running, they scatter, get out of range of the avalanche. Some of them end up in a ravine, digging a cave. They feel like they're safe, but then they're not properly dressed. They didn't survive the night, or they got hit with the avalanche anyway and they didn't make it out of range. It's a very reasonable explanation.
Oh, yeah.
I think the only thing that really throws a plot hole in that explanation is the radiation.
That's fair.
Because why were they covered in radiation?
And I think
avalanches don't carry radioactive properties.
I think some of the injuries too to me are like, I could see how an avalanche might cause a little bit of like your chest caving in and some broken ribs, but like to get that blunt force of like a car and the way they were found, like, I don't know, that's crazy.
Yeah, and it is a little wild that you have your entire chest cavity caved in, every rib broken, but your arms and legs aren't broken. So that is a little odd.
Yeah.
Like, how did not your whole body get broken then, if that's how strong the avalanche was? So it's a reasonable explanation, but it does still leave some questions unanswered.
Well, the avalanche theory suggests that the hikers were caught in a slab avalanche, which is one of the most common types of avalanches, apparently. And we already kind of went into what a slab avalanche is, so we're not going to cover that. But to get into it, the hiker's tent was located on a slope at an angle of around 30 degrees, an angle that's steep enough for avalanches to occur. And it was positioned possibly just below a potentially unstable snowpack, which might have triggered the whole thing. Remember when they switched the route of their plan so they could go on this ridge with the lighter weight? That area may have been pretty unstable. And when they did the search and stuff, I do remember some people did call out during that search and say, like, this is a dangerous area where the ridge of the tent was found. Specifically, not where they were hiking, but where they ended up staying that night was not a normal or recommended place to stay. Key pieces supporting this theory are, to start, the state of the tent. The tent was ripped open from the inside. That's a pretty critical detail. I mean, this does suggest that the hikers were in such a hurry to escape that they cut their way out from the tent. And well, the idea is that they were either buried under the snow or terrified by the avalanche and had to make a pretty hasty exit. And again, like was pointed out in that quote, in normal circumstances, if a person is simply caught in an avalanche, they probably would have remained inside the tent to protect themselves from the cold. But they were experienced. They knew what the dangers of avalanches were, so they fled if this was the case. Unfortunately, that was a mistake because, as we know, the tent was found pretty uncovered with snow, but that down the ridge had some snow.
Yeah, and maybe with a different type of avalanche, it would have been more deadly to get stuck in the tent under all that snow. But because it was the slab avalanche, it hit differently and it really would have been their best shot to just dig themselves out later.
Yeah, it just hit differently.
Oh my gosh. I mean, how could you know something like that in the moment, though?
No, you
Especially
couldn't.
if it hit at night while you're half asleep. I mean, I'm assuming that's what happened. If we're saying the avalanche is the for real theory anyway, I'm assuming that it happened at night because half of them were unclothed or not fully clothed or wearing someone else's clothes. Like they were probably all sleeping or in their sleeping bags, like ready for bed. And then whatever happened to make them flee the tent happened, and they grabbed whatever clothes were nearest, threw on anything they could, and yeeted.
Well, remember when we talked about slab avalanches a little bit ago, they make a loud crack and rumbling sound.
Right.
So that could have awoken them all from their sleep, and then they would have been like, oh crap, avalanche,
We gotta go. Yeah.
And they all run, and then that slab avalanche happens to fall maybe from the slope or ridge above them, misses the tent mostly, but crushes down, slamming them all. Some of them try to survive maybe for a few hours after with some injuries, but they end up dying just due to hypothermia and the cold. Because again, some of the bodies were found in positions that hinted to investigators. They didn't want to say for sure, but it looked like they were heading back to the tent. So it looked like maybe the bodies that were found initially at the cedar tree, this is just a speculation at this point, kind of from me and some other researchers and other people online, but that the bodies at the cedar tree, the two that were found there, were the first ones pretty much to die in the group. And people believe that they were placed there at the cedar tree as like a, not a burial, but like we can't really deal with our friends right now, so let's place them both next to each other here as a final resting place. And the others fled down that ridge where they ended up kind of being found in that stream covered by snow. Maybe they dug a small little path to kind of hide out. And Igor and the others were found almost heading back in like a position that would suggest they were kind of moving. So that is just more or less speculation, but just kind of painting a small picture
of trying to fill in some gaps.
Of what might have happened if it was a slab avalanche. I mean, I could see that. I don't want to say for sure that this is what it was because...
But again, plausible.
It definitely is plausible. Because we'll move on to some other key evidence that supports this. The slope and terrain, like we mentioned. It was at about 23 to 30 degrees in angle, which again that's kind of a prime spot for avalanches apparently. Not only that, you have the injuries. Some of the hikers suffered pretty severe internal injuries, such as fractured ribs and skull fractures. These types of injuries are consistent with the force of a snow avalanche, especially when the force of a slab avalanche impacts the body. Maybe throwing them into a tree, throwing them into a rock.
That's true. And that would explain why the injuries only affect one specific major area of their body. You know, they have the skull injury or the chest injury, but they said none of the limbs were broken. Well, if the slab is what hit them and pushed them into something else,
it would be a direct point of impact. I could see how it would just get the chest. And interesting here too, they say that a lot of their wounds and stuff seem to imitate or show pressure wounds, not necessarily like a blunt force beating wounds, but pressure on the system.
Yeah.
That can come from being pushed and patted under all that snow.
Buried. And a few of these victims were found buried under several feet of snow.
Yes, they had to be probed out, essentially. Another thing that some people bring up in evidence that supports this is the lack of defensive or escape evidence. There was no real sign of an external struggle, so a lot of foul play was ruled out almost immediately. I mean, they're on the side of a mountain and only these hikers and their belongings were found. There's not really room for too much error unless it's an internal conflict, and the bodies didn't really show any sign of that. And finally, the last thing is the location of the tent. The hikers set up a camp in a location with a pretty limited safe escape route. The snow conditions coupled with the steep terrain, well, it could have trapped them in a way that prevented any evacuation at all. If the avalanche hit suddenly, the campers would have had limited time to react and might have been forced to flee in panic, making the chaotic and hasty escape from the tent seem pretty logical. And the fact that their belongings and equipment were left behind further supports the theory that the avalanche was unexpected and that they had little time to grab anything.
And that's another thing that's true, is that you mentioned they were able to rule out foul play pretty easily. And that's something I kind of hadn't thought about before. But the more I think about it, it does make sense that that wouldn't really be the case because there's 9 of them, first of all. So if this is like an attacker, it's got to be a big group of attackers or somebody who's like in a tank or something. And if they found footprints of these hikers, they would have seen tank prints or the footprints of 10 additional attackers. Like
exactly.
There would be more there, and they probably wouldn't have just sliced their way out of the tent and ran. They probably would have grabbed some of their hiking and climbing equipment and used it as weapons to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe some of them would have ran. Maybe somebody would be like, hey, you, get out of here. Get the girls to safety. Like, I don't know. But, like, I imagine that 1 or 2 of those slightly impulsive and reckless boys of the group would have grabbed one of their little ice picks or whatever, their snowshoes, and started beating back.
Oh, 100%.
Like,
again, the dude fought off a bear.
I'm like, I gotta believe that one of these dudes in the group would have been fighting back, and there would be evidence that one of their tools had been used as a weapon somehow.
Lyudmila had been shot in the leg before.
Yeah.
And
still continued her expedition.
These were hardened people. I'm not going to say they were like just soldiers and ready to get beat up, but they had seen some shit. I mean, they all went through some hard times.
They were survivalists.
It's crazy to me. But now we're going to talk about some challenges to the avalanche theory. So, first one we bring up is there's no sign of snow on the tent. Once the official investigation and the investigators, Lev Lenovo, hope I said that right, noted that there was an absence of significant snow on the tent or around the site. If an avalanche had truly struck, it would have been expected that the tent and surrounding areas would be pretty buried, or at least partially buried or covered in snow. Some skeptics also argue that the lack of snow accumulation around the tent raises doubts around this entirely. And there are also reports, this can't be validated, so this is speculation for sure, but some Mansi tribe members have been reported telling people that there was no avalanche that night. Like just word of mouth traveling through the time, like it was kind of said like, no, we had hunters in the area, we had people in the area, they did not experience or report an avalanche.
It was only like 2 or 3 days prior that they had stayed at the Mansi tribe's village.
Well, not their village, just like the
like outposts.
They were staying,
whatever, like their checkpoints along the mountain range.
They were walking the Mansi Trail. They didn't ever stay at a settlement. They stayed at North 2, which was the abandoned settlement when they began their like adventure. But then they just walked the Mansi trails a lot of the times, which were set up by Mansi hunters.
That's right. It was North 2 that was the settlement.
I don't think it was a Mansi settlement.
They talked about the Mansi people and interacting with them. When did they meet the Mansi people? Lyudmila or someone was writing in those diaries about like the Mansi people call it this, and they told us blah blah blah.
No, there's a Mansi area or a settlement near this area, but they never had direct conversation with the Mansi person. The one thing you're talking about is when they were talking about Mansi. They were saying Mansi, Mansi, Mansi. The conversation comes up in our talks more often than not.
They're just talking about.
And she even says, I wish I could speak their language so we could understand what these signs mean. Like they're writing these symbols and these stuff, but we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. So they never like directly encountered.
No, I just misremembered it then.
No worries. No, where the hell are the Mansis?
Like they were there.
Again, like every episode, if you ever know more about this case and you're shouting at your screen right now or screaming at the air because you're listening to us, like you know the answer, let us know. Email us. I want to be correct, so please.
Yeah, we will quickly upload an episode update / correction.
Exactly.
Believe us.
Mansi, they did not have any direct encounters with the Mansi. They just walked along their tribe or walked along their trails that they set up.
Okay.
But those trails were set up by hunters and were actively being used. Okay. I did say at one point they came across one of their labas, which were storage areas for their game that they would catch. And they were just built up like racks, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, so the Mansi, that's mostly speculation on that, but there are word of mouth rumors that there was no avalanche that night. And another kind of challenge to this theory is the behavior of the hikers. The fact that they fled without proper clothing in extreme cold conditions still remains puzzling. Even if there was an avalanche and they were ready to go, they're experienced hikers. They know and would probably have the thought, well, if this avalanche hits our tent, we're not going to be able to get back.
Right.
We will not have our supplies.
And they also know that, yes, an avalanche might crush us to death in this tent. However, even if we escape the avalanche out there, we will not make it through a night if we are not properly clothed and sheltered and heated because of hypothermia and freezing temperatures and wind and snow.
Exactly.
So they would have known that for sure. That was another thing I was sort of thinking of as a plot hole, but it just didn't seem big enough at the time. I'm like, well, I don't know, panic sets in.
No, I mean, that's fair. And this is all still speculation.
Right.
The official answer is an avalanche, but that does to me seem weird. This might be morbid and kind of my own personal thing, but if I'm an experienced hiker and a wilderness or survivalist, I know that, okay, I'm either going to die by being crushed by this avalanche, like you said, or I'm going to die by hypothermia and surviving in the woods. They're so far away from civilization, there was no chance of them just reaching a town that day. Yes, they might have gotten water and maybe been able to hunt or find some antsy people, but there's no guarantee. There's a chance that I would just take the brute force of the slab avalanche against going for the hypothermia. So I would take the shot to grab my stuff. I would be like, no, it's worth it to try to grab a coat, try to grab whatever. And maybe there's signs of that, seeing as how not all of them were unclothed. Maybe some of them had that thought to get ready, and they were screaming like, no, you can't go, like at least grab a coat. And those guys ran out barefoot or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, again, they were experienced, but they were also young. You know, a lot of these people weren't 25 yet. Our frontal cortex of our brain is, you know, that frontal lobe is not fully developed until you're 25, 26. So when things like panic or anxiety set in, it is very possible that no matter how intelligent or experienced you are, it all goes out the window because panic is here now. Like, so it, you know, I could see that going a variety of ways, that scenario of fleeing an avalanche and how they could end up in that way. Like, even though it still wouldn't make sense for them to choose that as people, I still think it makes enough sense that I would be willing to forgive that flaw in the theory. You know what I mean?
See, I would until you bring up Semyon. He was a 38-year-old World War II veteran. What are World War II vets or any vet or anyone in the military trained on? The first thing is to remain calm. And it is 1 against 9. I understand that, but it's 1 against 9, and all of these other members, they're all, I hate saying it so much, but experienced. And while they might panic and be young, you have a 38-year-old World War II vet. I feel like he'd be able to at least rally most of them to a secure point or a secure mindset.
Yeah, I forgot about that one older guy. Man.
Yeah, if they were all young kids, none of them were, but just, it's just every soldier that's the first thing they train you. Anything like that, an EMT, a police officer, you have to remain calm in those situations. It's very important.
It's vital to your decision making and execution of decisions. I mean, some of them were slightly clothed, some of them weren't. So who knows, I guess.
Yep, that one's up in the air, but that's pretty much it for the avalanche theory, which again, that's the official theory. So if you want to believe that, definitely go ahead. I mean, everything kind of fits there. But now we're going to move on to the infrasound theory. You ever hear of what infrasound is? So this,
like infrared?
Somewhat, kind of.
I don't really know what that is either, to be fair.
Well, let's learn.
It's like UV, right? I don't know. Science.
That's not this episode, but maybe we'll have an episode on infrared.
Oh, man.
So the infrasound theory suggests that the hikers may have been affected by low-frequency sound waves, known as infrasound, that could have induced a sense of panic and irrational behavior. Infrasound is a sound at a frequency below the limit of human hearing, typically below 20 hertz, but it can still be perceived by the body, causing a variety of physical and psychological effects. This theory was first put forward by Dr. Vic Tandy, a researcher who studied the effects of infrasound and its potential psychological and physiological consequences. He suggested that certain conditions, such as the ones present in the Dyatlov Pass area, could have caused infrasound to interfere with the hiker's mental state, triggering a series of reactions that led them to flee the tent in a panic and behave erratically.
So they're saying that this sound was caused naturally by the environment somehow?
We'll get into that.
Okay, he just said that the circumstances in this particular area could have been making this sound. Like what? So like the wind whistling through the mountains in the snow would make that frequency?
You're onto it. So, first piece of evidence supporting this, the wind and terrain. The Dyatlov Pass area is known for strong winds and rugged terrain, which could have created the right conditions for infrasound to form. The wind currents traveling over the mountain can create vibrations at low frequencies, especially when they interact with the specific topographical features, such as ridges, peaks, and valleys. This theory suggests that the winds might have created a low-frequency sound that could have had a psychological effect on the hikers.
Okay, this one's interesting. I know that things like different pitched sounds that we can't hear or compute correctly in our brains, I know that those can have a very physical or psychological effect on us, even if we can't necessarily perceive them as sound.
Well, I mean, think about it. Sound waves, a bomb goes off. The pressure from the sound, or just the pressure of the explosion itself, can pretty much tear you apart.
Yeah.
But let's think on a small scale. So 20 hertz and below, we can't hear it. But again, it's vibrations, and those sound waves are hitting our brains and hitting our organs and causing them to shift. You start to wonder, and it's kind of like, could that cause
bodily damage like force or pressure trauma?
Or brain damage, essentially, causing them to, like they said, panic, flee. Maybe someone thought someone was hostile, pushed them down the ridge.
Yeah.
Same thing, they fell, crushed their chest on a tree. Just all chaos ensued.
Okay, it's a little sci-fi-y, but it's also, like I said, it's like, I know that type of science and nature does exist. It's just not something you see happen commonly, because it doesn't happen in common areas to a lot of people.
Maybe it was just the perfect conditions. Like the one Dr. Vic Tandy said, it just happened to create this habitable area for this. And we'll talk about some of the psychological effects of infrasound.
I could buy it. I mean, I know that even just hearing the wind in our town, we don't have any sort of like landscape near us. We don't live near mountains or valleys or anything crazy. The craziest thing we live near is Lake Erie. Yeah. And we just live in a normal town. So not a whole lot going on to affect the wind. Just hearing it sometimes when it's extra rainy or stormy, or even just a really windy day, it gets loud and it can sound aggressive, and it can be super high pitched or it can be super low pitched. I've heard wind make all kinds of noises. So if I've heard all of that just here, and I mean, watching like tornado documentaries, they always talk about how it's so loud when you are near a tornado that it's like your eardrums are blown afterwards. And that's just wind going in a circle. So like, I definitely buy this theory that like this is something that is possible. I don't know how plausible it is, but I know that it is possible.
Well, like I was saying, let's talk about some psychological effects of infrasound. Infrasound has been shown to cause various psychological and physiological effects. One of the most common is anxiety, along with feelings of unease, nausea, dizziness, and a sense of dread. That's just terrifying. Some people exposed to infrasound report experiencing panic attacks, even though they can't hear the sound itself. The hikers, already in a challenging and dangerous environment, may have been more vulnerable to these effects, especially if they were experiencing extreme physical stress at the time. Studies have also shown that infrasound can cause hallucinations and vivid imagery, such as feelings of unseen presence or the sensation of being watched. In some cases, it can even induce irrational fear. This theory suggests that this might explain why the hikers abruptly cut open their tent from the inside and fled into the wilderness, even though the conditions outside were life-threatening. They may have been driven mad, basically, by a psychological impulse triggered by the infrasound.
I mean, again, it kind of tracks.
Some additional support to this theory is that the way the hikers were scattered across the slope suggests confusion and disorientation, which could have been consistent with the effects of infrasound. The hikers didn't try to stick together, and some were found much farther from the tent than others, and that might indicate that they were panicked, disoriented, or unable to think clearly. This suggests that the infrasound might have caused them to split up and run in different directions rather than seeking a more logical escape route.
That was another confusing part before, especially from the avalanche. It's like, why wouldn't they stick together as a group?
Yeah, they do fan out, and that's why I kind of added, like, maybe two of them got hurt, so they tried to bury some of them, and then they left, and maybe that's why they're kind of scattered. But
yeah, or another possibility that you mentioned is, you know, maybe a couple people were just like, oh my god, we gotta go, and just kind of took off, and everyone else is like, wait, like,
yeah,
we gotta get,
yes,
okay, we'll catch up. So there's definitely still some possibilities there, but that was another thing that's like, why wouldn't they stick together? It's a little weird that they're all scattered.
The first thing about Dungeons and Dragons, which is what I'm going to compare this case to, is you don't split the party. But I feel like a lot of people in a camp like this would agree the same way. You don't want to split your resources. If you are surviving on the own, yes, you have now nine mouths to feed, but you also have 9 people to help out gather wood, help hunt, help gather whatever you can to melt snow and drink it. Like, there's
9 brains working on ideas instead of just 2.
Yeah. So
yeah,
you'd want to stick together.
Yeah, unless it was like a last case resort type of thing. Like, we can't all travel. Someone has to go get help to hopefully send back for the rest of us. If it was that type of situation, it makes more sense. But in an immediate, we need to flee kind of situation, it is a little weird that they were all scattered. So something like a hallucination, maybe they were suddenly feeling turned against each other, more fearful of each other. Maybe they thought they were being chased by something outside the tent, and they thought they had no choice but to run whatever direction they ended up in. So it's becoming more plausible.
I kind of like this theory the more I read into it. The only other things to point out in this theory are that, again, infrasound has been known to cause these strange sensations like pressure on the chest, difficulty breathing, a sense of being watched, just that sense of dread. But infrasound can also cause a sensation of vertigo, which that could definitely play a role in this too. When you're walking down a slope, you might just trip right off the bat. I mean, vertigo is terrible.
Fall, end up in a ravine, crack your skull open, go unconscious, die of hypothermia from there,
it's done
get
right
buried
there
in some snow. It explains it. I mean,
the main supporting evidence for this, outside of everything we listed, just some details from the case that kind of support this, is a lot of people point to the absence of snow or the clear signs of an avalanche. This does seem like the most logical secondary answer. If you're like, okay, an avalanche couldn't have happened, well, scientifically, I could see this one. Then just slotting right in there and being like, okay, it was infrasounds. There are some challenges to this, though. The first challenge to this theory is that the strong winds required for an infrasound are not able to be present on the mountain. For infrasound to be generated in sufficient amounts to affect the hikers, the winds would have needed to be particularly strong, and the terrain would have to align just right. And while the area is kind of prone to strong winds, there's no direct evidence that the winds in the Dyatlov Pass area during that specific time were strong enough to create the infrasound that was necessary to induce panic or hallucinations. Infrasound is heard almost all the time. It's only these certain waves or this certain intensity that will get to you.
Okay. So it's like, yeah, maybe there was some circumstances that would allow for infrasound on this mountain, but it would not have been severe enough to impact them all like that.
Yeah.
We've got some arguing scientists here about how they view the circumstances necessary for infrasound.
It seems a little wishy-washy, especially when it comes to this next part. A lot of people seem to argue that the extent of panic and the behavior that was shown in these hikers is far beyond what infrasound causes. I guess in a lot of the studies, what is shown here is a little bit a hyperbole of what you might expect infrasound to actually cause. When they say irritability, sense of dread, sense of fear, it's more kind of like a subconscious thing that's happening in your body because it's caused by these vibrations.
We're heading more back into that sci-fi territory again of the bad guy emits the frequency to make everybody in the good team start fighting each other. Like,
exactly. A lot of people are like, no, it's not like that. It's way more passive.
They're like, that's a fun sentiment, you guys, but that is technically how it works, but like not on that scale. Maybe for something very small, like, I don't know, a fly. But like not a human being.
And the final kind of nail in the coffin, unfortunately, of infrasound is that there's a lack of direct measurement of infrasound. There is no direct evidence of infrasound levels being measured at the Dyatlov Pass site at the time of the incident. And without this, it's hard to definitively prove anything around this theory. So a lot of this remains largely speculative, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It sounds like more of a theorized branch of science than a concrete one. Maybe a little concrete, but a lot of it still sounds like theorizing or like it's a little up in the air or a little bit wishy-washy depending on which scientist you talk to.
More research needs to be done, basically.
It's debatable.
Yeah.
There's things about it that we're just not 100% sure on yet. So that makes sense that, of course, it's a questionable theory. It could have happened, but like we just don't know enough science to like know that. So we're not going to write that down on the report.
I mean, that's fair. I kind of think that's going back to the compelling force. I feel like that's why they ended up really going with that. I made it ominous when I said it, but ultimately I believe that that was more or less just them saying, well, we don't know it was hypothermia. We don't know it was an avalanche, but we do know that there was some sort of force that happened here, and we can't look any more into this because A, it's dangerous to go up there. B, there's not much evidence.
Yeah.
At least of what was left. But that leads us into our next part.
Aliens.
No, not yet.
But they're coming.
They're briefly mentioned.
I just joke. Aliens are always a theory, no matter what people's minds go to aliens.
All right. Our next theory is going to get a little fun. This is the military testing theory.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm going to like this one. This was one of my back of the mind theories. Especially when you brought up infrasound, I'm like, what if it wasn't natural infrasound?
That's...
What if it was some mad scientist lab up in the mountains and they were attacked, but it was by technology?
So the military testing theory suggests that the hikers may have been caught in the middle of a Soviet military operation, potentially involving weapon testing, biological experiments, or secret surveillance activities.
Not somewhere you want to be accidentally caught.
No, not in this time, especially.
Wrong place, wrong time. Very unfortunate circumstances.
This theory hinges on the idea that the hikers may have inadvertently discovered something they weren't supposed to.
They did go off trail.
They did.
They were like, let's take this other route. Maybe they weren't supposed to for good reason.
And when they went off trail, the military either acted to stop them or used the hikers as guinea pigs in a clandestine experiment. Some versions of this theory propose that the hikers were silenced because they knew too much, while others suggest that they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's a lot that you can dive into here. And just like every other one of our cases, please look into it. There is so much to be found about this case. I will say it over and over again. Go to dyatlovpass.com. That's where a lot of the Dyatlov Foundation stuff has ended up. They do great work over there. There's a lot of images, a lot of sources, and a current timeline event. It's a great place to absorb all of this. Supporters of this theory point to the unusual injuries on the hikers' bodies, such as internal trauma, missing body parts like their eyes and tongues, and the traces of radiation found on their clothing.
Yeah, the radiation's the big one.
Key pieces of evidence supporting the military testing theory, well, The first one is strange injuries, like we said. The severe internal injuries that some of the hikers sustained, such as broken ribs and skull fractures, have been described as similar to the injuries one might expect from a high-impact event, like, again, a car crash or from a parachute mine, an explosive device designed to detonate in the air, causing internal injuries specifically to the body.
Wow.
These mines were being tested at this time.
That's really crazy.
So that's a mine that can set off in the air, cause an explosion, and everyone on the bottom doesn't get necessarily hurt by the explosion, but the pressure
and aftermath of the boom
damages everything inside of them.
Dang. It's like an earthquake that just shakes up your bones, but from the pressure of a bomb in the air. That's weird.
These injuries were concentrated in the chest area, the head, and with some of the hikers found to have fractured skulls and broken ribs, but they didn't have any visible signs of external trauma. This suggests that the force of the impact could have come from a compressed or pressurized shockwave, possibly linked to a military device like the mines we mentioned, which would generate such a force without leaving external wounds.
Okay, yeah. And then again, we have a little bit of a conclusion for the radiation, a conclusion for them being a little scattered. And again, some of these guys worked in either government things at the time or very scientific things like radiation or things like that.
They all worked in nuclear. And
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, I didn't mention this in the first part, but it feels good to bring it up here. Maybe it kind of throws a wrench in this theory, but Krivonishenko was the one who I believe worked at the nuclear facility, like a nuclear power facility. And he wanted to leave at one point, but they wouldn't let him. It was the Soviet Union. They told him no. And I believe they moved him to a different plant. That different plant that they moved him to, I didn't have the name of it, but had a meltdown. Like the whole thing went into a terrible radiation meltdown, kind of like Chernobyl. And he was there during that event.
Oh my God.
So, I mean,
So it is possible that some of the radiation found in them or their clothing was just from their jobs.
they clearly worked in kind of probably
Yeah.
not the most safe nuclear. They probably worked in the not so safe nuclear facilities at the time. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's true. They didn't have OSHA over there back then.
no. Another thing people point to with this theory is the missing body parts, specifically the eyes and the tongues. Some of the hikers were found to be missing their eyes and the one without a tongue, and others had strange injuries to their facial tissues. This has led to speculation that the hikers might have been subjected to some sort of biological or chemical experiment. Some believe that the removal of the eyes and the tongue indicate the use of military weapons or exposure to toxic agents, as these body parts are often targeted in experiments involving biological warfare.
You learn something every day, kids.
Yep, there's your little fun fact to take home from this episode.
I didn't know that much about biological warfare. It's a start.
It makes sense to go for the eyes for sure.
But yeah. My thought process, I mean, this is going to sound dumb because I'm not good at scientist stuff or war stuff. I'm good at fiction books. But my first thought was the eyes and the tongue, because if you see too much and you can't see anything else, or you can't say anything else.
That's true.
Like my mind went to the Capitol in the Hunger Games. Like they would cut out people's eyes or tongues as punishment and then make them work for the Capitol
Yeah.
as like slaves.
What did they call them?
I don't remember.
Oh, it's on the tip of the tongue. We won't get it.
I've got half the word. I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't got it. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like it could have been
Yeah.
seen as almost a punishment or a deterrence for them to spread whatever.
Yeah.
Another thing that people bring up in this, like almost in all of these theories, this kind of plays a role, is the radiation traces that were discovered on the clothing of some of the hikers contributes to a lot of this speculation here. Fair enough. This discovery is one of the primary pieces of evidence cited by proponents of the military theory. The presence of radiation could suggest that some of the hikers were somehow exposed to this radiation, possibly from military experiments or testing in the area. Some suggest that the hikers might have stumbled upon a secret military test site or may have been exposed to radiation from just simple weapon testing. While some scientists argue that the radiation levels found were pretty low and could have been attributed to natural sources or materials that the hikers came into contact with in their natural lives, the radiation findings remain one of the most enduring mysteries in this entire case. To this day, almost all of these theories are kind of played on top of that, besides the avalanche and infrasound theory. The proximity to secret military facilities. The Dyatlov Pass is located relatively close to several military facilities in the Soviet Union, including secret testing sites that were declassified years later, and these sites were used for missile and weapons research. Some theorists believe that the hikers could have unknowingly ventured into an area designated for military testing. The Soviet Union could have used that area to conduct all the military experiments, and this could have included testing new weapons based on radiation-type powers. Just like how we kind of sent nukes out in the Nevada desert, they could have been doing that in these open mountain areas.
No, again, not out of the question. I mean, as far as military and war stuff goes, pretty standard stuff. Gotta test your weapons. You gotta make new equipment and progress and be better than the opposing team, you know? Like, that's all pretty standard run-of-the-mill stuff for military. Especially at the time, everybody was trying stuff with radiation and, you know, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there are sites near the pass too. I mean, that definitely plays a lot into this.
And I mean, that even could account for maybe if this entire theory isn't accurate, maybe that accounts for the radiation bit. You know, it's like, oh, it couldn't have been an avalanche. Avalanches don't carry radiation. It's like, well, yeah, but there was this testing facility like a mile over on the next peak. So like they were pretty close to it. They probably just kind of got some radiation from that. It kind of fills a plot hole in some other theories.
Oh, yeah.
Even just knowing that those facilities did exist nearby.
And the last piece that kind of supports this that a lot of people point to is the government or the military's silence on this whole operation once things were finally reported. Why did they wait so long? And there's some documents that hint that they knew that the hikers were dead just a few days after they died before anybody else had wanted to search. There are some declassified and translated documents out there that are a conversation essentially between these two officials that seem to claim the Dyatlov group was dead already. I think on like February 3rd or something, or 5th, so like just a few days after they had officially died, but nobody had been sent out to go after them yet.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, there's always something fishy going on when the government is like, we don't know what happened. It must have just been some overwhelming force. Shut it down, boys.
Well, to me,
no more questions, please.
No more. Yeah,
like
we're
gonna
end it there.
Like that always seems suspicious to me. It's like y'all, trying to cover something up. You silenced those hikers, and now you're silencing their families.
Well, ultimately, what this theory paints a picture for me is that these hikers, I believe, if we're going with this one, stumbled into a military testing ground, got hurt by military missiles or explosive devices that were set up in the area. I don't think radiation really plays into this. I think the radiation was more or less what was found on their clothes.
To do with their day jobs, probably.
Yes. I think the explosives that were set off were more or less mines that were in the area. So it was kind of just a layered minefield. Or they were a missile that was launched and crashed near them, kind of supporting the avalanche theory as well. And the government knew this, and they went in and had these two officials had this conversation saying, yes, the Dyatlov group is dead. We found them in our testing area. We need to dispose of them. We have to cover this up. We can't let the government be known this reckless around civilians. Everyone will get scared. They go in, they clean it up. They hold off the families that entire time, and they're telling them, no, they'll be back. Just wait. Once they get it all cleaned up from all this explosions and kind of set it up at least as somewhat believable pattern, then they bring the families in, they bring the searchers in, and they're kind of like, oh, this is crazy.
It's a kind of a fake crime scene.
And they're just covering essentially this up. I think that really stands out to me, where they got injured via military testing. I don't think it was direct from the Soviets. I don't think they were like, kill these people.
It was probably a case of wrong place, wrong time.
Yes.
But then consequences ensued, and the military was like, fuck, well, this can't be our fault.
No, yeah, we can't claim the lives of 9 that will not go over well.
Yeah, they're like, we got enough shit going on right now already. We need good PR and good PR only. Somebody else is taking the fall for this one. I don't care.
Yeah. And I think that ultimately that's really what happened here, at least in this theory.
Yeah. And
I don't think it was anything like crazy like the biotesting or...
I do find it a little hard to believe about all the biological testing stuff. I know that stuff does exist in the world, even though it can sometimes seem very science fiction Marvel movie-esque. But I don't think it was just anyone out in the woods that they were snatching for these projects. It was usually very targeted.
Or, unfortunately, like vagrants, like homeless people that didn't have a family.
I mean. It was targeted either... if a government or a military or a dictator or whatever was going after people for biological warfare and experiments, they're usually going to go after specific types of people, whether it's for their race or for their income class or for their lack of stability and home and people who will look for them. They're gonna have some sort of decision-making process there. It's not just like, all right, find people to experiment on. They usually are more one-track mind than that. And a lot of these people who do these horrible deeds, like experimenting on other people, are also like racist and bigots and, things like that. So they're usually targeting people in that manner.
Yeah, definitely not going after their own.
They're not just going to go after their own scientist, nuclear people who are achieving great heights. Literally. Yeah, I do think that the possibility of these hikers being used for biological war experiments and things is pretty unlikely.
Yeah, I don't believe that. But I
think if it was government interference, it was more like you said, probably some sort of wrong place, wrong time scenario. And they got hurt or saw too much and had to just be kept from being found until the government decided the time was right and enough evidence had been cleared away.
Yeah, that's what I ultimately believe this theory, if this was the case, would fall into. That's what would be the likely solution there.
Which, in all honesty, usually in history, I think when there's been government cover-ups, most of the reasoning is just to cover their own ass. It's not like we hate these families. Ha ha ha. We're going to make them suffer and not let them find the answers. It's more like, oh no, we fucked up. We can't let these people know how bad we are at our jobs or how malicious we used to be in the past.
Exactly.
It's always like, we've got to save face. We've got to cover our own booty. Let's cover this up and change the story.
Yep.
That's usually the explanation if it's a government or police cover-up.
They're not targeting, like you said, the hikers specifically, but it's an accident, a terrible accident that happened, and unfortunately, they're just trying to save face. So after that, we're going to move on to a little bit more far-fetched theories. I know, how can we get more far-fetched from that? But of course we can, because this is Mystery Date. We're not going to touch on this one too much because I think that some of these theories take away from the actual validity of this case. When you throw around aliens or you throw around a Yeti or you throw around some things like that, it hurts and dampens what some of the people are actually searching for when it comes to answers here.
Yeah, it takes away from the seriousness and the reality of the victims.
Yes.
It turns it into more of a joke.
Exactly. But we'll touch on them because if we don't, people will mention them in the comments and everyone will go crazy.
And don't get us wrong. We believe in things like aliens and Yetis. So we're not saying these things are out of questioning altogether. We can't spend all our time on it because it's all disrespectful.
Exactly. But we'll still talk about it just a little bit because you want us to.
Yeah.
So the first one is the Yeti theory.
Love it. Here we go.
The
You guys, there's a Yeti! Cut the tent open and get out of here!
I mean, that's more or less where this is all based off of. The Yeti theory. The Yeti theory poses that the 9 Dyatlov hikers were attacked and killed by a mysterious cryptid, a giant ape-like snow creature said to inhabit the Russian Ural Mountains. You know, Russia's version of Bigfoot with a slightly different take on it. So I guess it could be called Yeti because this isn't necessarily the Yeti we're all familiar with within what region is that? I believe it's like the
That is in
Nepal. Yes. It's not I mean, all these mountains are pretty close, but this is kind of, this cryptid does have its own lore in this area. It's not just the typical Yeti. So some people that believe in this cite that there are strange footprints. Some accounts, especially from unofficial sources and later retellings, mention large humanoid footprints found near the site. They were allegedly not matching any of the hikers' known boot patterns and supposedly came from bare feet. Of course, these reports are sketchy at best, and they were not included in the official investigation. But hey, you know, people can throw things out there if they want.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, people bring up the state of the bodies, hinting to what a violent attack that would be. But again, I think this falls short because a lot of the external wounds weren't there.
Right.
Just because the chest was caved in, it didn't look like there was a lot of external trauma that caused that cave in.
Yeah, there wasn't hand gripping from crushing. Like, you can see if somebody has been strangled, even though the damage is on the inside, you can still see it on the outside of the neck.
Exactly.
So if we're saying that this Bigfoot Yeti creature came up and started, like, you know, picking up hikers and crushing them to death, and that's how they got these injuries and why they're not all scratched up on the outside, you would still be able to see some sort of hand or paw print, like, grip.
Yeah,
like, you would
100%.
still be able to see the pressure of that crushing.
Another thing people bring up in this is the Yeti photo, and we'll post it up so you guys can see it all. Just like everything else, we'll have some photos and whatnot on our site, mysterydatepodcast.com. Go there. But the Yeti photo is one of the final frames found on a hiker's camera that shows a blurry figure in the forest, standing upright and humanoid in shape. While most people agree it's likely one of the hikers just messing around, believers point to this photograph as proof that something or someone was out there watching them. On top of this, people point to that little pamphlet they wrote, the Evening Note Orton, citing that they mentioned the Yeti in there. But again, the Evening Note Orton was written as a satirical piece of like newspaper. They wrote it as a joke. If they mention the Yeti in there or a sighting of the Yeti or does it exist, they're joking. It's comedy, essentially.
It's a parody. That is interesting, though, that the Yeti photo is the last one on the camera roll from that camera.
It's one of the last ones. And I think some people do point that out a little more often than maybe it should be, because it's definitely not the last one. And
Okay.
let me see if I can pull it up to show you. Because it is a little chilling. Like, if you did not do any research into it and someone presented this story as a Yeti attacked these people and showed you this, you would probably be like, oh my gosh, what? Like that could be something.
It took my eyes so long to figure out what I was even looking at.
It's a
I
shitty
need to
photo, I
know.
mean.
Like, this is like, all I see is this one tree up front and like snow and tree. Like, I had no idea what I was looking at for the longest time staring at this photo. I thought that this was like a face and upper body right here. And I'm like,
No, it's a more defined.
and then I'm like, oh, I see what's happening. I wouldn't say that looks like a crazy humanoid creature. I would say it looks like a dude in a coat with a beard, maybe. And it's like super blurry and it's black and white and like he's 35 feet away. So
yeah.
he's also, you can sort of see some like foot trench tracks here.
No, yeah, you could see.
And he's like following in the
Yeah.
track the same way. Like this is clearly one of the hikers, and they just turned around and they were like, "Hey, buddy, smile for the camera," Or he was like, oh, I'm creeping up behind this tree. Like,
well, and my question is too, I understand
he's
that this
just following along in their hiking tracks. It's just a dude.
And I'll show you, first off, this was the photo previous in the frame.
Are you serious? Those photos were next to each other in the camera roll?
Yes.
Yeah, so the other picture is like the same dude.
A little off.
He's just like, he's a little bit closer to the camera lens and he's like bending over, showing his butt like, hoo-hoo.
Yeah, so.
Like, guarantee you, it is just whoever the person is with this camera is just walking in tandem with this other hiker and taking a few shots of them being silly.
That's just I don't know if I showed you any of the search photos. That's the tent and the way some of the bodies were discovered. This stuff we will not show on the podcast.
But you can find it on Dyatlovpass.com.
Dyatlov Pass.
Dyatlovpass.com.
I was doing this fine. I always say Dyatlov, but it's Dyatlov is the official.
Yeah, I will say there is snow on this tent. I mean, it looks pretty crushed down, which could be more because they cut it open and then like it collapsed from there.
When again,
it's not buried in snow. It doesn't look like an avalanche took it out.
No,
it's just got some snow.
And this is days later though when they found it.
That's true.
So like
it could have
just
accumulated.
snowed,
yeah.
But if there was an avalanche, you'd expect that whole. I mean,
you wouldn't see it. Maybe the top pole of one of it sticking out, but
it's haunting, dude. A lot of those photos, if you want to look through them, please. I honestly don't recommend you look through the post-mortem ones unless you're weirdly fascinated by it. I'm not going to judge, but be your own guest to look at what you want. A lot of the photos that I feel like I want to include will be part of the episode or will be up on our website. So other than that, the last thing in the Yeti theory is, again, just the Mansi tribes in the area have stories of a creature called the Mink, and it's described as a forest-dwelling, sometimes aggressive being. And these tales have been passed down through generations like every other cryptid tale, and they fed into the narrative that the hikers may have, well, crossed into sacred land or encountered something ancient that was best left kind of to its own, and that's where this Mink falls into this and the Yeti. So while it's not necessarily a Yeti, I guess it would be a Mink theory.
So the hiker's off-path choice wandered right past the Yeti's cave, and he wasn't happy about having visitors on his lawn.
Just went ape shit.
Ape shit. Get it?
Yeah, so let's just say I don't really think that the Yeti theory is too much anything there, but I wanted to bring it up because people would bring it up on their own, or you'll find some stuff on it, and I want to show more or less that.
I mean, I will say it's worth noting at least because the Mansi people of that region have that lore and those ancient stories about that creature, that at least there's a connection there. It is worth mentioning, if for nothing else but the sake of the Mansi people there.
Yeah.
That they might have that theory, but I don't think there's really any merit here either.
No, I'm not saying the Mink doesn't exist, but I don't think they had anything to do with this case.
Yeah.
Next up, we have the alien theory.
Here we go.
There's not too much here, unfortunately. I won't lie.
No, but I knew it would be here.
A lot of this is speculative and, of course, hinders on the radiation that was found on the clothing. Since I don't really believe that radiation personally played a part too much in this, I think that that was more or less what was found on the hiker's clothing and myself. I'm not going to touch on that too much, but basically, people say that alien space tech equals radiation. So if they were encountered with aliens, they got radiated. That's what that comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the only thing there to have the alien theory is, oh, there's radiation on them. Oh, some of their injuries are a little questionable. Oh, they were in weird places, not together. That means they were beamed up and then beamed back down.
Whenever you have,
right. Like
whenever you have a lot of mystery like this in a case, you're always gonna someone's gonna slot aliens right in there.
Someone's always gonna go there. And again, I'm not saying we don't believe in aliens, but like that's not always the answer just because something seems mysterious.
This theory isn't completely just a loss though. There is some validity here. Multiple independent reports from people in nearby regions, including locals, hikers, and even military personnel, claimed to see strange orange glowing orbs in the sky around the time of the incident. So that was late January to early February 1959. These lights were described as silent, fast-moving, and not like any aircraft known at the time. Some say they hovered, others say they zipped off. There's a lot of conflicting reports here. UFO enthusiasts argue that this could have been a lot of people observing a craft or something interacting with the hikers. Or missiles. Are they seeing Cold War tech missiles? Maybe guided missiles, maybe heat-seeking missiles, so they see them kind of stop for a second while they find their target and then proceed, and that's what that hovering is.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that a floating light could be at that time that people in that area might not know what it is.
It definitely, I mean, I could see the UFO a little bit.
It could even be their own government tech, and their government is lying when they say, well, we don't know what that is.
Exactly.
Because it's tech that's not technically released
No,
yet,
even
or
if you
it's on top secret.
Even if you were military personnel, you might not know everything. So you might see these orange lights and be like, what the hell was that?
Exactly. And during times of war like that, especially like in the Soviet Union and the Cold War, there was a lot of things that were being kept under wraps. Very need to know basis. It wasn't like, okay, the whole army is going to get the whole rundown of the story and the motifs and everything's going on. It was like, okay, here's your orders. No questions. Go. All right. Now here's your orders. No questions. Go.
Compartmentalizing, I think is what they call it,
like
is where you split everything up.
You two are the ones who need to know everything. You come with me. Everyone else, you follow your orders and you don't ask questions, and that's that. So, I mean, yeah, it makes sense that even the government would be like, oh, I don't know what that is. Weird.
So, outside of that, people also point to that there might have been missing time and a lack of struggle kind of pointed here that also leads to the alien theory. The sudden incapacitation of a lot of these bodies, from the looks of it, like Igor and those who are crawling back, leads a lot of people to believe, well, were they put in some sort of mind control? Again, maybe caused to lose time in some sort of manner via mental states or whatever these aliens can do to us. But they also point to that there was no signs of a fight. So clearly whatever happened here happened quick, and it happened outside of the own free will of the hikers.
Yeah, without the opportunity of defense.
Yeah. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Verdict on that one, it's probably not aliens, but it's always a damn good story.
Yep.
Outside of that, we're just going to cover a few quick ones here because, again, there are endless amounts of stuff you can look into when it comes to this story. And that's why I love it and why it's so fascinating. Every area of conspiracies or unsolved or anything can be put into here, and you can see how almost all of them work. It's wild. But other things that people bring up are katabatic winds, which are apparently a sudden and powerful blast of cold air that rushes down a mountain slope with immense force. It's fast, it's unpredictable, and potentially deadly. Some experts believe that such a wind could have struck the hikers' campsite in the middle of the night, creating a terrifying wall of wind that rattled their tent and made it feel as if it was about to collapse or be swept away. Kind of in the same vein as the avalanche, forcing them to run. The other one brought up is, well, hypothermia. Just simple case of somehow or whatever reason, the campers got outside, whether it was the katabatic winds, an avalanche, something led them outside, and the simple case of hypothermia, and a lot of their other injuries were just after the fact, or who knows. The final one is foul play or bureaucratic cover-up. The bureaucratic cover-up kind of goes, I've already covered that in what I believe with the military testing theory, but the foul play, there's not much here, but some theorists and people looking into this kind of hint to the relationship between the two of the hikers that were no longer dating but had a little bit of a past, and they say that maybe something happened there, but I don't see that at all with an infighting between the group.
Yeah, I know we talked about the relationship love triangle type of thing existing there, and maybe some tension or awkwardness within the group, romantically speaking, but The one hiker was found wearing the one dude's clothes. So it's like, okay, even though you're broken up, like, y'all are clearly still on good terms if you're rushing out into the cold and he's willing to throw you his t-shirt so you don't freeze. Yeah, it just seems weird to me. It seems pretty out of character from what we know of all these people that these guys or girl would just start a fight to the death with each other over their relationship. And then it still doesn't really involve how the rest of the group ends up dead. Even if it started as a simple fist fight about love and romance or whatever, and 2 or 3 people get involved, it gets more and more involved. Everybody's like, break it up. Hey, don't hit him. Oh, I'm gonna hit you. Like, it becomes a full-out fist fight among the gang. Even if one person got killed, I imagine all of them would have immediately stopped fighting and started freaking out about the fact that one of them is now dead. And how would all 9 of them end up dead? Were they supposed to believe that it was a murder-suicide of all 9 of them? Or, like we talked about before, that some outside attackers came in and somehow left absolutely no trace of evidence or injuries or defense weapons or anything like that? Seems pretty unlikely.
I mean, yeah, I don't think infighting is at all a cause for this. So outside of those theories, one other thing that some people bring up, and this is the very last, I promise, is the KGB spy theory. And this is kind of hinted towards the connections between Alexander Kolevatov and Yuri Krivonishenko, because both of them kind of worked for these nuclear facilities. People seem to think that maybe they were put up by the KGB to possibly deliver nuclear materials without the knowing of the other students. And maybe something went wrong when they went to sell or drop off this radioactive goods. Some people point out that maybe they were sent out to see the CIA. Maybe they were just delivering it to another Russian military base and got apprehended on the way there. There's a lot there. I don't know on this one. I tried to research a little more. It seems interesting, but I don't think there's really too much here, unfortunately. It sounds interesting. And again, it sounds like something that could be plausible because the KGB was recruiting people like crazy at the time. They did have a lot of spies and undercover work going on. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't think that this one's that plausible. No. And that's it. That's it for the theories. Regardless of what happened, at the core of this story, 9 young hikers died while attempting to do something admirable, adventurous, and just frankly badass. This should not have happened. They had their entire lives ahead of them, but instead something happened on that mountain that cut them short. Something that I believe the Soviet and the now Russian government knows about. Something they don't want to take the blame for, and frankly, I don't think that the families of these hikers will ever get the answers that they properly deserve. So please check out dyatlovpass.com for any more information. Then we just can't cover it all here.
It would be endless amount of episodes. We'd have a 10-part series.
You can do a podcast on just Dyatlov Pass alone. All of our images from this podcast are sourced from there, and they were colorized by us. They are not the colorized ones you'll find on the website. Those are not in public domain, so we can't use those, but I took the black and white ones and colorized them myself. So during the podcast episode, you'll see some of those. Some are colorized, some are not. Some are the original black and whites, some are whatever. It's just a mix. But all of that was sourced from dyatlovpass.com. So please check them out. I cannot thank them enough. We talked a lot.
Yep.
We have 2 episodes, about 3 hours of this topic. We'll keep it quick. What do you think happened?
I think it is probably either the more simple avalanche theory. And again, I think that some of the plot holes in that one with not having the tent buried, if it was a slab avalanche, maybe they thought it was going to hit closer to them than it actually did. It made that loud noise. They took off running. It hit somewhere else. They succumbed to the elements. That one tracks the most for me. And yes, it is the official ruling as of when they reopened and closed the case. But I also am not completely looking past the government/military cover-up theories. Because again, it was times of Soviet Union and Cold War and KGB spies and lots of weird war tactics and experiments happening in these days, and new technologies and radiation and nuclear experiments. It's not out of the question by any means that the government or military would have covered up this incident or been at fault for it. And again, whether that was deliberate or accidental and then just covering their own ass kind of thing, I think that's another decent possibility.
I definitely think that there was testing that happened, not a malicious intent from the Soviet government at the time, but I believe that the Dyatlov group stumbled onto something in that mountain that was dangerous for them and ultimately ended in the end of their lives. But instead of owning up to it and acknowledging the accident that happened, the Soviet government did what they could to halt the investigation and clean up as much as they could possibly get to from the site of where this all happened, remove whatever evidence they could of their own, because there's so many unanswered questions here, but who knows? That's why this case is so fascinating and so much studied even today. But with that,
well, there you have it.
Yeah, there we go. That's the Dyatlov Pass case. I hope you all enjoyed it. It was a lot of writing, a lot of researching, a lot of talking. I don't think I've ever researched this much in my life. So I really hope you enjoyed it. I tried to put a lot of work into this. But now we move on to date night debrief. We'll keep it very brief here because we have gone for an hour and 40 minutes and I can't imagine what editing this is going to be like. So it's easy. Question time. What podcasts, if any, do you listen to right now?
Oh, what podcasts do I listen to? I listen to Cultish. That's one of my favorite podcasts. Basically, like, is it a cult or is it just kind of weird? Are you just judgy? Like, it's one of they go over all kinds of topics. Check them out. I like them a lot. They definitely fit in with the mystery date vibe. So if you like us, you'll probably like them. And then I listen to a podcast for writers called Shit No One Tells You About Writing. And I listen to a podcast for photographers called Oh Shoot.
There we go. Check them out. To keep mine brief, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but the most frequent ones right now are Red Web, which if you like Mystery Date, I will just say check them out. You will love it. Other than that, I also like Morbid, which is a true crime podcast. They are great. They are fantastic to listen to, and you feel just like you're sitting with a group of friends. But check those two out, especially if you like Mystery Date. They'll fall right in line with our topics. When it comes to free talk or personal updates, not much since at least part 2. I mean, it's only been a week since we recorded that one, so.
I will just say we are recording this on Easter.
Oh, yeah, so happy Easter if you celebrate. If you celebrate,
happy Easter. And also...
Oh, yeah, happy 420 if you celebrate that as well, because it's 420 this year.
Multi-holidays. So...
Whatever
that's
you're
all
celebrating,
I've got.
enjoy
Free talk
it.
is just enjoy your spring holidays.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to come back every other week for a brand new episode and a brand new mystery.
And be sure to email us episode ideas or love letters to our email, mysterydatepodcast@gmail.com. If you are sending an episode idea, please write episode idea in the subject line so we can find it easy.
Also, be sure to share this podcast with your friends or even your enemies. We're not going to judge. We just want you to help get our name out there. And be sure also to check out mysterydatepodcast.com. There you can send us voice messages. You can send us text messages. Honestly, whatever you want to do to just let us know that you like to listen to us, or just tell us any fascinating stories that might have come up in your life.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe your voice message will make it onto an episode of the show.
Yeah, yes, exactly. We can play it on here and we can all listen to it and judge you.
And while you're at it, follow us on social media as well for updates on our show and our life, as well as updates on the website and our future Patreon that is coming along.
Yes.
Our social media is at Mystery Date Podcast on all platforms.
That's all. So be safe and have a great rest of your day or night.
And remember,
every good mystery deserves a date. Bye.